The sun rises over the orchard, its golden light spilling softly across rows of apple trees. The air is crisp, fresh with the scent of morning dew, and all is still, save for the gentle rustle of leaves in the breeze. A small, weathered farmhouse stands quietly at the edge of the orchard, its windows glowing with a soft warmth from within. Outside, an elderly man, Harold, sips his coffee on the porch, his eyes lost in thought as he watches the quiet world wake up. From the other side of the fence, a dog steps into view. A golden retriever, her fur shining in the sun like the morning itself. She walks slowly, purposefully, each step a quiet rhythm as if she's been here before many times. Her gaze is steady, focused on the orchard, and she pauses for a moment at the entrance of the trees, just long enough for Harold to notice. With a gentle tilt of her head, the dog steps forward, her nose brushing the bark of the oldest tree in the orchard, one Harold himself had planted so many years ago. Harold watches her in silence, his heart swelling with an emotion he can't quite place. There's something about her actions, something so familiar, yet distant, almost like she's remembering, or waiting for something. His eyes flicker, uncertain, and then he smiles softly, as if the dog's presence is a comfort. But in that moment, something shifts in the air, something Harold can't quite put his finger on. The dog lingers by the tree a little longer, as if sensing something invisible. What the dog sensed would change everything. The morning air was crisp, tinged with the sweet scent of dew. Harold sat on the porch of his small farmhouse, cradling a steaming mug of coffee in his hands. The golden light of the early sun filtered through the trees in the orchard, casting long, soft shadows across the grass. It was always peaceful here. Quiet. A slow, familiar rhythm of life that Harold had known for years. The days felt the same now, yet there was something different. Not unsettling, just a shift. A soft ripple in the quiet of his mornings. Every day, for the past few weeks, the same thing had happened. He would wake early, let his feet find their way to the porch, and sit in the same rocking chair, looking out at the orchard. He would watch the trees stretch toward the sky, their branches heavy with the weight of memories. And then, just as he had finished his first sip of coffee, she would appear. The dog. Harold wasn't sure when she first started showing up, but each morning, like clockwork, the golden retriever would step onto his property and head straight for the orchard. He never saw her come in. She was always there, as though she had appeared from the mist. Harold would watch her with quiet curiosity as she walked, her coat glistening in the soft morning sun, her steps slow but deliberate. The dog never barked. She didn't seem to have an agenda. She simply walked to the orchard, paused for a moment, and then began her slow circling of the oldest tree. It wasn't a tree Harold would typically visit. It had been there when he and his late wife had moved to the farm. They had planted it together, just a sapling then, and over the years, it had grown tall, its branches reaching out like arms. It was the kind of tree that held secrets, small, hidden ones. The dog circled it again. Once. Twice. Harold noticed her pause just for a second longer by the base, as if she was listening. Or waiting. And then, after a few more moments, she would walk slowly away, as if nothing had happened. Harold sat there on the porch, his mug forgotten in his hands. A strange warmth flooded his chest. It was just a dog, nothing to be alarmed about, but for some reason, her quiet routine seemed to stir something deep inside him. Something buried. She returned the next day, just as quietly. And the day after that. It was as if the dog was marking time. It wasn't until the fourth morning that Harold began to wonder. Why the same tree? What was it that made her circle it with such purpose? And why, despite the years he'd spent in the orchard, had he never noticed it before? The dog stopped, just for a moment, to look over her shoulder at Harold. Her gaze was soft, steady. And for the briefest moment, Harold thought she might have been looking at him. What the dog sensed would change everything. The mornings had grown colder, the air now crisp with the early touches of fall. Harold had grown accustomed to the quiet rhythm of his life, but the dog's presence had become a quiet thread woven through his mornings. Each day, without fail, she would appear at the same time, walking with the same soft purpose into the orchard, as if drawn there by something only she could sense. Harold began to notice small things. Subtle shifts in the way the dog moved. The way she tilted her head to one side, as if listening for something in the air, something beyond the rustle of leaves or the chirping of birds. And every time, without fail, she would walk to the base of that same old apple tree. The dog's behavior intrigued him. It wasn't like any dog he had known. She wasn't restless or searching for attention. She wasn't chasing after a scent or playing in the grass. No, her movements were measured, focused. Each step seemed deliberate, her gaze steady, her body language calm and purposeful. Harold's curiosity grew as the days passed. He had lived here for decades and never once noticed anything special about the tree the dog kept circling. But now, with the dog's quiet rituals, the orchard felt different. Almost as if there was something hidden beneath the soil, something waiting to be unearthed. One morning, Harold watched as the dog approached the tree, her fur gleaming in the sunlight. She paused at the base of the tree, sat for a moment, and then slowly, deliberately, she began to nudge her nose against the bark. It was a soft, quiet gesture and almost affectionate touch, as though she was trying to communicate something to the tree itself. Harold stood up from his chair, the mug of coffee still warm in his hand. He took a slow step toward the dog, his boots crunching softly against the gravel path. She didn't seem to notice him, her attention fully fixed on the tree. What was she sensing? What was drawing her here, day after day? It wasn't just habit. It wasn't coincidence. There was something deeper at play here, something Harold couldn't quite grasp. He stood there for a while, watching the dog, letting the quiet settle around him. He couldn't explain it, but as he watched her, he felt a strange pull toward the tree himself. There was an unspoken connection between them, Harold, the dog, and the orchard that he couldn't put into words. As the dog finished her moment of quiet communion with the tree, she turned her gaze toward Harold. There was no wagging of the tail, no excitement. Her eyes met his with a steady, calm look that somehow felt knowing. Almost as if she had been waiting for him to come closer, to understand what she had already discovered. The dog gave a small, almost imperceptible nod, and with that, she turned, walking slowly back toward the edge of the orchard. Harold followed her for a few steps, his heart inexplicably heavy, as though some part of him had been left behind beneath the branches of that old tree. She disappeared into the mist, and Harold stood there, watching the orchard. The morning light softened around him, but his thoughts were sharp. Something was unfolding here, something he hadn't yet seen. But the dog knew. She had sensed something that he had yet to understand. And he could feel it too now, the pull of the orchard, the whispers of the past, and the quiet, patient knowing of the dog. What had she found? The next few days passed in a haze of gentle autumn light and cool breezes, each morning falling into a quiet pattern. Harold's days felt like they were floating, suspended in the stillness of his routine. The mornings were predictable, the soft glow of the sun, the sip of coffee, the dog appearing at the edge of the orchard, making her way to that same old tree. But Harold's thoughts were anything but still. The dog's behavior lingered in his mind, a quiet puzzle that refused to be solved. He found himself waiting for her every morning, not out of a sense of obligation, but out of curiosity, a deep pull he hadn't felt in years. He noticed the little things more now. The way her fur shone like gold under the soft light of dawn. The way she paused in the same spot every time, her eyes drifting toward the tree, then looking at the ground, as if listening for something. And her calm. So much calm. It was almost as if the world around her didn't matter, like she existed outside of time, in a place where only the orchard and its secrets held meaning. It wasn't just the dog that had changed. Harold found himself visiting the orchard more often, wandering the rows of trees that had always been a part of his life. But now, they felt different. More alive. Every leaf, every branch seemed to whisper something he couldn't quite catch. One morning, after the dog had circled the tree a few times, Harold couldn't help himself. He crossed the small distance between his porch and the orchard, his boots crunching softly on the path. The dog paused, as if she had been waiting for him, and together they stood by the tree, the early morning light painting the world in warm golds and soft oranges. Harold reached out slowly, his fingers brushing the bark of the old tree. It was rough and weathered beneath his touch, but there was a strange sense of familiarity about it. The same kind of familiarity he had felt when the dog had first looked at him, like they were all part of something that had existed long before he'd understood it. As his hand rested against the bark, memories began to surface. Flickers of laughter, the soft rustle of leaves in the wind, the scent of fresh apples on the breeze, and her Lily, his late wife. He had forgotten how often they had stood together beneath the shade of this very tree, planning their future, dreaming of a life that would never come. His heart tightened in his chest, a quiet ache settling there. Harold closed his eyes, feeling the warmth of the sun on his face, and the dog sat patiently beside him, her gaze focused on the tree. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to fully remember. She had loved this orchard. Lily had always dreamed of it being more than just a place where trees grew. She had imagined it as a living, breathing part of their life. And now Harold was here alone, standing at the base of the tree they had planted together, with only this quiet dog beside him. The dog's presence was oddly comforting, yet there was something else. Something unspoken. She wasn't just here to keep him company. She wasn't just wandering the orchard because she had nothing better to do. No, she was here for a reason. And though Harold didn't know it yet, she was beginning to show him the way. He stepped back from the tree and looked at the dog, who was still sitting quietly beside him. Her eyes met his with the same steady gaze, almost as though she was waiting for him to understand something, waiting for him to find what she had already discovered. The dog turned and began to walk toward the other side of the orchard, her steps slow and purposeful. Harold hesitated for a moment, but then, feeling the quiet tug in his chest, he followed her. They walked together in silence, each step taking him deeper into the orchard and closer to the answer he hadn't yet found. There was no rush. Just the steady, rhythmic sound of their footsteps on the gravel path. And with each step, Harold felt the weight of the past, the burden of lost dreams, and the quiet pull of something he couldn't yet name. Why had she chosen this orchard? Why this tree? And what was it that she knew, that he didn't? He wasn't sure, but he could feel the answer coming closer. The days stretched into a gentle rhythm. The mornings seemed to arrive earlier with each passing week, and the sunlight, so soft and golden, poured over the orchard like warm honey. The dog had become a constant presence, an unwavering companion in the quiet of Harold's world. They never spoke, not in words at least. But in the stillness between them, there was something deeper, a bond that was becoming harder to ignore. Every morning, Harold would watch as she walked into the orchard, her golden fur glowing in the early light. She would go straight to the old apple tree, pause there for a moment, and then, as though on cue, she would turn and sit beside him. It was as if the orchard had become their shared space, a place where words were unnecessary, where silence carried all the meaning they needed. One morning, after a particularly cold night, Harold found himself standing by the orchard's edge, the dog beside him. A thick layer of frost covered the ground, and the trees were dusted with the lightest shimmer of ice. The air felt crisp and still, every breath a small cloud of white in the sharp cold. The dog, as always, walked toward the tree, her movements slow but deliberate. Harold watched her, feeling something stir in his chest. He hadn't realized how much he'd come to depend on her quiet presence. How much the simplicity of her companionship had filled the empty spaces inside him. He found himself following her that day, stepping carefully over the frosty ground until they both stood together by the old apple tree. The dog sat beside him as she always did, her gaze fixed on the branches above. Harold reached down and placed his hand gently on her back, his fingers brushing through the soft fur. It wasn't an intentional gesture, just something that felt right in that moment. The dog didn't flinch, didn't pull away. She simply sat there, calm and steady, as though she had always been a part of him. As Harold's hand lingered on her back, he felt something strange, a quiet warmth that spread through him. It was a feeling he hadn't had in years, he felt, for the first time in so long, connected to something outside of himself. The dog, the tree, the orchard, they were all part of something larger, something greater than any one of them alone. He let the moment linger. He wasn't sure what it was, but he knew that this strange connection, the one that seemed to bind him to this dog, to the land, to the memories of his past, was beginning to shift something inside him. The grief that had taken root in him after Lily's passing had been a silent, ever-present companion. But now, with the dog's steady presence and the quiet rhythms of the orchard, Harold found that grief didn't feel as heavy. It didn't feel as final. It felt like a memory, one that was slowly being wrapped in warmth, one that was becoming less of a burden and more of a companion in its own way. He realized he had been holding onto the past for so long, clinging to memories of a life that no longer existed. But with the dog by his side, with the quiet stillness of the orchard around him, he felt something new blooming inside of him. Something delicate, something hopeful. It wasn't that he was forgetting Lily, or that he was letting go of their shared dreams. It was something gentler, something more tender. He was remembering her in a way that felt less like pain and more like love. Like the quiet warmth of the morning sun, or the cool embrace of the evening breeze. The dog, without a word, had brought him here. To this place, to this moment of quiet reflection. She had led him, step by step, back to the orchard, and now she was showing him something else. She wasn't just guiding him to the past, she was guiding him to a future that he hadn't been able to see until now. Harold glanced down at the dog, who was still sitting beside him, her gaze steady and calm. There was no rush. No hurry. Just the two of them, in the stillness, as the world outside the orchard continued to turn. For the first time in a long while, Harold felt something new stirring inside him. Not a sense of loss, but of connection. Not just to the orchard, but to the dog. To the past. And to a future that was waiting to unfold. And in that moment, Harold finally understood she wasn't just a dog. She was a bridge. A bridge between him and the world that had been lost, and the world that could still be. The mornings had grown warmer, the frost of the previous days replaced by a soft, golden glow that seemed to wrap itself around the orchard. Harold's steps had grown more deliberate as well, and he began to find himself walking the paths of the orchard with an ease that had eluded him for so long. The dog's presence had become a quiet fixture in his life, something he never questioned, something he simply accepted as part of his mornings now. But today was different. As Harold approached the orchard that morning, he noticed a slight shift in the air. The dog had already arrived, of course, but she wasn't by the old apple tree, where she always started her rounds. She was standing at the far edge of the orchard, near the fence line, her body still and focused. Her nose was lifted slightly, as though she was scenting something on the wind. The calm, patient look in her eyes was replaced with an intensity Harold had never seen before. Curiosity tugged at him, and without thinking, he followed her. She was always a few steps ahead, walking slowly, but with a newfound sense of purpose. Harold found himself drawn to her, as if some unseen thread was pulling him forward. He wasn't sure why, but he had an inkling that today would be different, that today, he would finally begin to understand. As he followed the dog deeper into the orchard, past rows of trees that had long been familiar, something started to feel strange. The quiet peace that had once defined the orchard was gone. The world around him felt stiller, as though it was holding its breath. The dog stopped at the base of another tree, one he didn't recognize. It wasn't particularly old, but it stood apart from the others, its bark a little rougher, its branches a little twisted. Harold hadn't even noticed it until now. He watched as the dog circled the tree once, twice, her gaze never leaving its trunk. She stopped, and for a long moment, she simply sat at its base, as though she were waiting for something. Harold took a hesitant step forward, feeling a pull toward the tree as well. As he approached, a strange sensation washed over him, something he couldn't quite name. His fingers brushed lightly against the bark, and in that moment, a wave of memories surged through him, memories not of his own, but of the orchard itself. He saw flashes of Lily, her face, her laughter, the way she would stand beneath the shade of the trees, imagining what their lives might be like in the future. He could almost hear her voice, clear and bright, as she had once said, "This orchard will outlive us, Harold. It'll be a place for generations." But there was something else, too. Something he couldn't quite place. It was like a whisper in the back of his mind, something half-remembered, just out of reach. And yet, there was a deep sense of peace that accompanied it, an unspoken truth that felt more like a memory than a revelation. He looked down at the dog, who was still sitting patiently at the base of the tree, her eyes fixed on him. It was as if she was urging him to understand something, to uncover a secret that had been hidden right beneath his feet all along. His heart raced as a realization began to settle over him. This was the moment. This was what the dog had been leading him to. It wasn't just the old apple tree that held memories. This orchard was filled with stories, with echoes of lives lived and dreams shared. Lily's dreams. Their dreams. And somehow, the dog had known all along, guiding him back to these quiet corners of his life. But there was still something else. Something he wasn't seeing yet. The dog had brought him to this tree for a reason. The answer was hidden here, in the branches, in the earth beneath the bark. And he knew, deep down, that whatever it was, it would change everything. He reached down, touching the base of the tree again, his fingers lingering against the rough bark. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, he felt it. A faint pulse, a warmth that radiated from the tree, as if it were alive with something beyond the ordinary. The dog looked up at him again, her gaze steady, knowing. She had been here before. And now, Harold was beginning to understand. It wasn't just the dog who had sensed something all along. The orchard itself had been waiting. Waiting for him to remember. And as the dog turned, walking slowly away from the tree, Harold followed her, the weight of the discovery settling into his chest. The past, the orchard, and the dog, they were all tied together in ways he had yet to fully grasp. But the answer was coming. Slowly. Gently. Like the dog's quiet presence. The following days felt different, like the air had shifted. Harold could no longer ignore the feeling that something deep within the orchard, something tied to the land itself, was calling to him. The dog's presence, once a comforting routine, had now become the thread that pulled him through the quiet mystery that surrounded him. Each morning, as he made his way to the orchard, he felt a subtle but persistent tug on his heart, a sensation that told him that there was more to this story than he had yet uncovered. He had visited the strange tree the dog had shown him every day since. And each time, as he touched the bark, that same warm pulse seemed to echo through the earth beneath him, connecting him to something that felt just beyond his reach. It wasn't until the fifth morning that Harold found himself unable to resist the pull any longer. He was standing at the base of the tree again, his hand resting on the rough bark, his eyes closed, trying to focus on the subtle pulse beneath his fingers. It was then, in that moment of stillness, that a thought struck him with surprising clarity. A thought that had been slowly taking root in his mind, like a seed planted years ago, now growing into something undeniable. Lily. This tree wasn't just any tree. It was the tree, the one they had planted together. He remembered it now, vividly. They had stood side by side, laughing as they dug the small hole for the sapling, talking about their hopes for the orchard, their dreams for the future. They had chosen this spot because it felt right, because the earth here felt warm beneath their feet, alive with possibility. And yet, over the years, Harold had forgotten. He had forgotten the significance of that moment, the tree, their hands in the soil, the promise they had made to each other. Harold's breath caught in his throat. How could he have been so blind? So wrapped up in the grief of losing Lily that he had forgotten the life they had built together, the dreams they had shared? He opened his eyes, looking up at the twisted branches of the tree, the morning sun filtering through the leaves, casting long, soft shadows across the ground. And there, in the stillness, the orchard began to feel different. Not just as a place of memory, but as a place of continuation, a place where life was still unfolding, even without Lily physically present. The dog, as if sensing his realization, was sitting by his side, watching him intently. She hadn't moved, her eyes were steady, patient, as though she had been waiting for Harold to come to this understanding. "Lily," Harold whispered, his voice catching in his throat. This was our tree. The dog's ears perked up, and she gave a soft, almost imperceptible nudge against his leg. It was as though she were offering a quiet comfort, a simple acknowledgement that he was no longer alone in this moment. Harold slowly sank to his knees, his fingers brushing the base of the tree again. This time, instead of feeling the warmth of the earth beneath his fingers, he felt a surge of connection, a deep, overwhelming sense of peace. The orchard wasn't just a place where he had lived. It wasn't just a memory of a life he had lost. The orchard was still alive, still growing, still a part of him. And the dog, with her quiet wisdom and her gentle presence, had brought him here to see it, to see that the life he and Lily had dreamed of was still unfolding, even without her. Tears welled in his eyes, but they were tears of sorrow. No, these tears were different, tears of release, of understanding. He had been holding onto the past for so long, refusing to let go, refusing to believe that the future could still hold beauty. But now, in the company of the dog and the orchard, he understood that the past wasn't something to hold on to forever. It was something to honor, to remember, and then to let go of. With that realization, Harold felt a weight lift from his shoulders. He felt lighter, as though the grief he had carried for so long had softened, had begun to shift into something more tender, more hopeful. The dog turned and began walking slowly toward the far side of the orchard, her tail swaying gently. Harold stood, watching her for a moment, before following her, his heart lighter than it had been in years. Together, they walked through the rows of trees, the quiet stillness of the orchard wrapping around them like a soft blanket. Harold felt a new sense of peace settle in his chest, and he realized that the journey he had been on, the one that had started with the dog's quiet visits to the orchard, was only just beginning. He wasn't alone anymore. Not in this orchard, not in this life. The dog had brought him here, had shown him that there was still something worth living for. The future wasn't as empty as he had thought. It was filled with new possibilities, with new memories to create. As they reached the far end of the orchard, Harold stopped and looked out over the land. He could see the sun rising higher in the sky, casting its warm golden light over the trees. And for the first time in a long time, he didn't feel like the weight of the past was holding him back. Instead, he felt free to move forward, to live the life that Lily had once dreamed of for them. And he knew, with quiet certainty, that this was only the beginning of something new. The mornings were growing longer, the sun rising higher and warming the orchard in shades of gold and amber. Harold had spent the past few days walking the orchard with the dog, his companion in this quiet journey of rediscovery. Each morning, the dog would lead him to new corners of the land, places Harold had long forgotten or never fully appreciated. There was something about the dog's gentle guidance that allowed Harold to see the orchard through fresh eyes. It was no longer just a place of memory. It was a place of life, a place where love had taken root and would continue to grow, in ways he had yet to understand. He had begun to take longer walks, deeper into the orchard, beyond the familiar rows of apple trees and toward the wild corners that had once been left to grow untamed. The dog was always by his side, her steady presence a comforting anchor to the world around him. This morning, the dog walked ahead of him, leading him once more to the old apple tree, the one they had planted together. Harold had come to think of it as a symbol of their shared dream, a dream of love, of life, and of a future they would never get to see together. He had spent years avoiding it, unwilling to confront the pain that had lingered beneath its branches. But now, as the dog led him back to it, Harold felt a deep sense of peace settle in his chest. They stood together by the tree, the dog sitting at its base, her eyes fixed on Harold. She was waiting, just as she had been waiting for him to understand the truth about this place. Harold reached down, brushing his fingers against the rough bark, and for a moment, he closed his eyes, allowing the memories to flood in. He saw Lily again, her laughter, her smile, the way she would stand beside him in this very orchard, dreaming of the life they would build together. He remembered the long nights they spent under the stars, talking about their future, about the children they hoped to raise, the house they would build, and the orchard that would one day be filled with life and love. The dreams they shared felt so vivid now, so real. And as the memories filled him, Harold understood something deeper. The dog hadn't just been leading him through the orchard to relive the past. No, she had been showing him the future. She had been guiding him to see that the orchard wasn't just a monument to a lost dream, but a living, breathing testament to the love he and Lily had shared. And it wasn't just a reminder of the past, it was the beginning of something new. The truth washed over him in that moment, and Harold felt his heart swell with an overwhelming sense of gratitude. He wasn't alone. The orchard was still alive, still growing, still holding the love that had been planted there so many years ago. And the dog, this quiet, steady companion, had been the bridge between his past and his future. She had guided him back to the place where he had once been whole and showed him that it was still possible to be whole again. He looked down at the dog, her soft eyes gazing up at him with the same steady, knowing look she had always had. She had understood all along. She had known that the memories Harold had been holding onto weren't meant to weigh him down. They were meant to be cherished, to be carried with him as he moved forward. Harold reached down and placed his hand gently on the dog's head, his fingers running through the soft fur. There were no words for what he was feeling, just a quiet, profound sense of connection. The dog had brought him back to life in a way that no one else could. She had given him the gift of remembering, of honoring the past while still looking toward the future. And for that, Harold would be forever grateful. As the dog rose from her sitting position and turned to walk deeper into the orchard, Harold followed her, a sense of peace in his heart that he hadn't known in years. They walked through the rows of trees, the gentle breeze rustling the leaves overhead. Harold felt the weight of his grief begin to lift, replaced by a quiet hope, a hope that had been buried beneath the sorrow for so long. The dog stopped once more, this time at the edge of the orchard, where a new sapling had been planted. Harold hadn't noticed it before. It was small, its branches still delicate and young, but it stood strong in the morning light. He had no idea when it had been planted, but as he looked at it, he understood. This was the future. This was the new beginning. He knelt beside the sapling, his hand gently brushing the tender leaves. It wasn't just a tree. It was a symbol of renewal, of life, of everything that could still be. The dog had shown him that life would continue here, in the orchard, just as it had continued in his heart. The dog sat beside him, her head resting on his knee, her soft eyes fixed on the sapling. It was as if she were saying, "This is where we start again." Harold's heart swelled with emotion as he looked out over the orchard, the trees that had been with him through so much. The memories of Lily were still there, but they were no longer a source of sorrow. They were a part of the foundation on which this new life would grow. The dog's work here was done. She had guided him through the past and helped him find his way to the future. And now, with the sapling at his side, Harold knew that the orchard would continue to thrive, as with the love he had once shared with Lily. As the sun rose higher in the sky, Harold took a deep breath, the quiet warmth of the morning settling around him. He wasn't alone anymore. Not in the orchard, and not in life. He had the dog, and he had the memories of the love that would always remain. It was time to move forward. And with the dog by his side, he was ready. The days had stretched into weeks, and the orchard had transformed under the gentle touch of time. The leaves of the apple trees had shifted from deep green to vibrant reds and golds, their branches heavy with fruit ready for harvest. The air had become crisp with the early signs of winter, but it wasn't the cold that filled Harold's heart. It was warmth, the quiet warmth of memories, of love, and of the dog who had led him back to life. Each morning, he still rose early, as he had done for so many years. The gentle light of dawn would fill the sky, the sun climbing slowly over the horizon. And every morning, as though by ritual, the dog would appear. Harold had come to expect it. It had become part of the rhythm of his life, an unspoken bond between them, as natural as breathing. The orchard felt like a living thing now, not just a place to visit but a place to belong. Harold no longer walked its paths alone. The dog, steady and constant, was always there by his side, her presence like a warm embrace. They had come to understand each other in quiet ways. The dog had given him the space to grieve, and in return, she had led him gently toward healing. One morning, after a light frost had settled on the grass, Harold found himself walking with the dog beneath the apple trees, the air crisp but not biting. The dog walked a little ahead of him, but Harold was content. He had learned to let her lead. After all, she had shown him how to find his way back to the orchard, back to the life he thought he had lost. Today felt different, though. As they walked through the rows of trees, Harold found himself looking at each one as though he were seeing it for the first time. He noticed the way the branches bent under the weight of the fruit, the delicate light filtering through the leaves, and the soft, earthy scent of the ground beneath his boots. Everything felt alive. As they neared the far edge of the orchard, where the new sapling had been planted, Harold paused. He hadn't given it much thought in recent weeks, but today, standing before it, he could feel its quiet strength. The sapling had grown taller, its branches reaching toward the sky. It wasn't just a tree anymore. It had become a symbol of something deeper, a new beginning, a continuation of a love that had never truly left. The dog sat beside him, her eyes soft, as though watching over the sapling. Harold reached down and placed a hand gently on the small tree's trunk, the wood still tender and young. His fingers traced the bark, feeling the pulse of life beneath it, just as he had felt it in the old apple tree all those days ago. The warmth, the connection, it was the same. The past was still here, in the orchard, in the trees, in the dog. But it wasn't something to fear anymore. It wasn't a burden. It was a part of him, woven into the fabric of his life, and it had made him who he was. The dog stood, and Harold followed her gaze as she looked toward the horizon, her tail swaying gently. He knew then that it was time. Time to fully embrace the future, to allow the orchard and his heart to grow. He took a step back from the sapling, his heart full. The orchard had been a place of dreams, of love, and of loss. But now, it was a place of healing. And as the dog turned and walked slowly toward the house, Harold felt a quiet peace settle within him. The journey was far from over. There was still much to be done, but for the first time in years, he felt ready. The dog paused at the gate of the orchard, looking back at Harold one last time. Her eyes were steady, knowing. She had done her work, had led him through the past and into the future. And now, with the orchard blooming around him and the sapling growing strong in the soil, Harold understood. The love he had shared with Lily had not disappeared. It had merely transformed, taken root in the orchard, and was now part of the land itself. And in this quiet, gentle space, Harold was finally ready to live again. To love again. To grow, just like the trees around him. He walked back toward the house, the dog by his side. The orchard, bathed in the soft light of the morning, stood behind them, its trees whispering in the wind. It was a place of beginnings. And Harold knew, without a doubt, that he was ready for whatever came next. The journey had been long. But the future, like the orchard, was full of possibilities. And with the dog by his side, he was no longer walking alone.